This thing is an extraordinarily close race with less than a month to go. What is your read on where these candidates are?
Well, the NBC poll is the best one Trump has had in a while for a couple of reasons. One of them is that Harris had done what looked impossible for more than 2 months, which was increase her favorable ratings after being in the public eye for a very long time. Tim Walz is very popular coming out of the gate. Both of them improved on those metrics. I think Steve laid it out pretty well. The problem in each of these swing states is that there is a coalition of voters who did not like Donald Trump in 2020 and voted against him in 2020. They feel more warmly now, and there also are voters who come into the electorate that the Trump campaign, and Democrats acknowledge this. It's a reason why the vice president's doing more black voter outreach. People have come into the electorate and don't have problems with either the Trump 2016 campaign, which they don't remember, or any of the negatives from when Trump was president before. It's been true for a year. He has related himself to the fact that prices were lower when he was president, and for a lot of voters, that's the start and the end of the conversation.
Dr. Drucker, you wrote about the battle for Pennsylvania suburbs, so I'm assuming we're talking Doylestown, Haverford, Villanova. What is key in this fight for those voters?
Well, it's a really interesting contest. Republicans are focused on the more middle class and working class suburbs, the older suburbs of Philadelphia. And
like Delaware County?
There's a door-to-door. Delaware County, but also Bucks County. There's some blue-collar suburbs of Bucks County, Levittown, where I was going door-to-door with Republican canvassers last week. Democrats are looking, obviously, at college-educated voters across the suburban counties in Philadelphia, the more upscale voters. I was in Bucks, and Democrats tend to win Bucks, but what Vice President Harris needs is some separation from Donald Trump in Bucks, the way Joe Biden had it in 2020 versus the narrow victory in Bucks that Hillary Clinton had in 2016. So major battleground. Bucks in particular is a major bellwether, both sides tell me. And then we're also looking at the Pittsburgh suburbs, those parts of Allegheny County that are suburban, Blue County, but she needs to run up the numbers there as much as she can to offset, obviously, those red counties in what we like to call the Pennsylvania T, rural, less populated, where Donald Trump's going to do extremely well.
Aaron, let's talk about this town hall VP Harris did with Charlemagne the God. He has been a huge supporter of hers for quite some time. He was outspoken in being critical of President Biden when he was the candidate. This town hall was part of her effort to reach black male voters. Charlemagne has a huge audience. Did she do what she needed to? Do you think it moved the needle in any way?
Well, before I get to that, Stephanie, I just want to go back to what David was just saying about Pennsylvania, because in terms of the Commonwealth, she has also just rolled out a plan for rural voters and had Governor Walz out in Pennsylvania talking to people about that plan. She's not just in Philadelphia or in blue counties in Pennsylvania. Unlike, in previous elections where Democrats were not necessarily focused on other parts of the Commonwealth, she is across the Commonwealth trying to talk to voters to at least try to chip away at some of Donald Trump's margins in some of those kind of places where he is really doubling down on the voters that got him elected in Pennsylvania.
But before you move on to her town hall, then, do you think she can have success there, Aaron? I mean, when you think about those counties where they have Tim Walz, those were sort of Donald Trump's blue-collar bread and butter. Is there an opening to crack into that voter base for him? I mean, those are the people who love him.
Right. I mean, I think that, for Democrats who are kind of having PTSD from 2016, a lot of them lamented that Hillary Clinton, for example, did not go to a lot of those places, especially in the home stretch 3 weeks out from the election, the point at which we are now. And so for Harris and Walz to be trying to go and earn those people's votes, Kamala Harris continues to say, even though she says, tonight to Charlemagne, I'm going to win, she's still positioning herself as an underdog and is still saying, I know I have to earn every vote. And so going to places like that, going to some of these, some of these podcasts and in front of some of these audiences to contest for some of these people that maybe wouldn't have been open to her, I think that signals that she's at least trying to chip away at some of the support that he's had with some of those voters.
David, do you think she can chip away with those voters?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, they're certainly making the effort. Look, her biggest push here, and it's true that this campaign is doing more to try to appeal in the red counties of Pennsylvania and every other swing state, then certainly the Clinton campaign, although the Biden campaign did make a push here. But this is different because we don't have a pandemic that's curtailing the ground game. But where Harris is really doing something interesting, whether or not it works, is really going after disaffected Republicans in a sort of real concerted way, with a lot of high-profile endorsers and a micro-campaign within her campaign that's focused solely on targeting and turning out disaffected Republicans, using those Haley voters in the GOP primaries versus Trump as their target market. So I think there is an opportunity there because there is a lot of political realignment going on in the Trump era that involves more than just old school Union Democrats moving over to the Republican Party. There's also been these college-educated suburban professionals becoming more comfortable with Democrats. The key here is that the margins are tight, and Donald Trump, as Weigel alluded to, is a stronger candidate by the numbers, at least today, than he was in either 2016 or 2020. So despite everything, the Democrats feel about Trump after seeing all that they've seen, he's stronger with voters overall, including non-white voters, than he has ever been.
All right, Dave, new topic. Dave Weigel, new topic, and I'm going to say this one slow because it's confusing. Okay, it's this fight over Virginia's voter rolls. The state canceled registrations of people who were suspected to be non-citizens. Governor Youngkin says that has been the policy for almost 20 years. Then the Department of Justice sued the state for removing people 90 days before the election. And as we heard, Donald Trump is all over this. The case is ongoing. Do you think it's going to become a bigger part of GOP talking points in these last few weeks of the campaign? Because I'll tell you, a whole bunch of super Trumpers have sent me articles about this today.
And Trump will keep talking about it. It fits into something they've been saying for months, but with more intensity in the last few weeks. This idea that not only will non-citizens vote, but if you listen to Elon Musk, who we're learning from campaign finance reports has given close to $80 million to the Trump campaign in the last few months, there's an idea out there, not backed up by reality, that the people who've been crossing the border since 2021 are being recruited to vote for Joe Biden. That's the storyline. What's happened in Virginia is this is DOJ sued after a couple other groups. The National Voter Registration Act says that you can't do a mass purge of voters 90 days before an election. It's far less than 90 days before the election. That's the argument the DOJ is making. When the DOJ acts this close to the election, they know there are political implications. So Virginia is not seen as a competitive state. Trump's not acting like it is. What Trump campaign won't want to happen is to get this story out of Virginia and start talking about it in every state and tell his voters, some of whom are still, I wouldn't say not motivated to vote, but still worried about the count, to say you need to get out there and overwhelm these phantom voters I'm warning you about who are going to steal the election. This will fit right in, whether or not it's true.
$80 million that we know of from Elon Musk to Trump in the last couple of months. Just imagine for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine. Imagine if George Soros bought Twitter, pushed pro-Democrat narratives and lots of misinformation all day, every day, yesterday and tomorrow, and pumped $80 million in the last 2 months of the campaign. Can you imagine the outrage? All right, let's talk about Georgia's early in-person voting. It kicked off today. Huge record turnout. Aaron, what's your takeaway from that?
Well, listen, I mean, it is huge. And just to give you perspective, I mean, over 300,000 people casting ballots in Georgia. That breaks the previous record from 2020 by more than double, when about 136,000 people voted on the first day of early voting. And that was in a pandemic. I think we know that Democrats tend to be the ones that vote early. Republicans tend to vote on Election Day, not to mention that the former president really kind of tainted the process of early voting and absentee balloting after the 2020 election for his voters. And so it'll be interesting to see or to know how many Republicans are availing themselves of this process. But I think that if this is a good sign for anybody, it's probably a good sign for Democrats, just knowing that they tend to vote early. And what this signals is, at least in Georgia, that those voters are energized and mobilized behind Harris, the same energy that we've seen in the rallies that she's done in that state. That is now translating perhaps into actual voter turnout, which is frankly where both of these campaigns are now in the home stretch of this election. They are focused on the ground game. They are focused on getting their voters turned out. They know that is the poll that matters, right? The poll that is going into election season.